You're kind of like a biohacking guy. I'm trying to coin the phrase ancestral hacking. All right.
Ancestral hacking.
Instead of
That's
biohacking.
a lot more syllables than biohacking.
It is. It's not. It doesn't roll off your tongue.
Yeah.
But it's like what biohacking does kind of mimics our ancestral environment, right? That's what I think it should do.
Some of it, yeah. Like the red lights mimic infrared from the sun, or the grounding mats and the grounding shoes mimic earthing or grounding, or, you know, a cryotherapy chamber mimics cold water, or a sauna might mimic like a hot afternoon day. Or yeah, same thing, like altitude training, like the hypoxic training devices, the Live O2, that would be an example of a biohack. Or like a fitness biohack, like a Vasper, where you have your arms and legs occluded and you're exercising and you have cold. And so I think that there's a sector of biohacking that's mimicking natural living, or what our ancestors might have done, and allowing us to more efficiently do that, sometimes in a shorter period of time, in a post-industrial era in which we are kind of fighting an uphill battle where we might have to work indoors. So we need red light panels indoors, or we aren't sleeping in a cave, desk, so we need like a grounding mat on our bed, or there's like glass and needles and syringes on the dirty Austin streets. So you need to wear like big built up rubber soled shoes. And so you put grounding straps on your shoes. And those would all, I think, fall under the category of mimicking in a post-industrial era, using smart science, what our ancestors would have gotten through natural means, or what we can and should also get through natural means that we top off with those biohacks. But I do think there's like some other biohacks, like some of the stuff I mentioned, like, you know, the hypoxic training devices, or the Vasper, or a hyperbaric chamber, or like stem cell injections, you know, some of that stuff. Yeah. Like that's full on like level. Modern science stuff that our ancestors would have done.
Well, I appreciate that stuff. So I'm just more into the ancestral hacks. I'm trying to do that. It's like a more natural version. Like instead of getting all these gadgets, like sleep rings and this and that, I'm trying to just do it more naturally. But yes, there is a next level that I appreciate. And that's what you are more of an expert in.
Peak human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
Seu tu apogeo.
Peak ninguém.
Peak you. O melhor humano.
Peak Greenfield.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Peak Human. I'm Brian Sanders. I'm working daily on the Food Lies film. It's so fun to see it develop. We still need your help. Please go to foodlies.org and click through the Indiegogo campaign, where you can still get the Eat Meat shirts and any other perks that help us finish this film, pay for all the graphics we're doing, custom animations, custom score, all the things to make it top quality. This is the only way we can get through to the mainstream, get it on Netflix, and have people take it seriously. It requires a lot of money. So please help us. We're working on it daily. We're trying to support a team here. Everyone's working for free pretty much. Same thing with this podcast. It's all done for free without advertisers. This model is backfiring a little bit. Everyone else has all these advertisers supporting the show. I just get emails every week with products and companies trying to offer me money to support the show, and I turn them down because I'd rather stay unaffiliated. But it's hard to keep doing this without making any money. I do have Nose to Tail, so you can go to nosetotale.org and purchase some great products, and that helps support the show and allows me to pay rent and my very small team. We still have a Patreon. If you go to patreon.com and search for Peak Human, you can become a member there, get the extended show notes, and help this show survive. You can join the tribe, get the extended show notes, plus all the other features, private Zoom calls, tons of other stuff. That helps keep this show going. This is all community powered. It's on the community. We can keep it going, or I can take advertisers and I can do it the traditional way. It's up to you guys. Just let me know. If you don't mind hearing about products, then I can advertise products, and then it'll be easier because you guys don't have to pay anything. And maybe you will like the products that I talk about because I will believe in them. I'll only take products that I believe in. So that's a perfectly fine option. I might have to just stick them in the middle of the show and interrupt the interview. Who knows? Email me, DM me on Instagram. Tell me what you think. Support nosetotale.org. We've got the good meat, grass finished, primal ground beef, organs mixed in. Seriously, the best way to get organs in your diet. Skin food is back in stock, selling out quickly. Get it while you can. Seriously though, it's not gonna last long. We got the soap, we got the biltong for on the go. I'm going to this ranch event and I'm bringing a ton of biltong for everyone so we can eat on the move, eat on the plane, skip bad meals while traveling, and eat some good grass-fed meat. Got the seasonings, of course. So nosesdale.org, go to saving.org for the program, for the tribe, sign up for the newsletter. Now on to today's guest, Ben Greenfield, my new pal. We connected in Austin. It was fun hanging out the day before the podcast. Then I played some beach volleyball and ran over, and we met to do this podcast in person. The video is only 16 minutes, so you can check that out on YouTube. He showed up with this crazy drink with kava and kratom in it. I do not endorse this drink. I don't think kratom is something that people need. It was an interesting experience. I didn't really look much into it, but I don't know if it's the best thing to drink. Maybe it's better than alcohol. Anyway, felt a little weird from that drink. I didn't eat all day, plus played the beach volleyball, plus woke up too early, didn't get enough sleep. Then I felt sick after this episode. So I personally do not endorse this drink, but we did drink it. And we did have a good podcast. A lot of good stuff that he's learned over the many years as a biohacker. We talked about ancestral hacking versus biohacking. I prefer the ancestral hacking. He takes it to the next level, to the biohacking, which is great. If you want to do that, absolutely. He's the man. He'll tell you all about it. He knows all about it. He's tried it all. Bunch of good takeaways that he's learned over the years. We talk about alcohol. It was my birthday. I did have some alcohol. We talk about how to mitigate the bad effects of that. Bunch of good stuff. More about Ben. Ben Greenfield is a human performance consultant, speaker, and New York Times bestselling author of 17 books, including the widely popular titles Beyond Training, Boundless, Fit Soul, Spiritual Disciplines Journal, and the Boundless Cookbook. A former collegiate tennis, water polo, and volleyball player, bodybuilder, 13-time Ironman triathlete, and professional obstacle course racer, Ben has been voted by the NSCA as America's top personal trainer and by Greatist as one of the top 100 most influential people in health and fitness. Some good credentials. All right, let's get on to the show with Ben.
So I guess we're recording.
Yeah, we're recording.
Okay. This is going to be interesting because you just gave me this this skin food. This is your product, Brian. This nose to tail stuff. So the ingredients, I've been out in the sun doing a photo shoot all day because I'm a hot fitness model. And so my skin's probably a little bit dry, or at least UVA'd and UVB'd. So I'm just going to put some of this in my face. Grass-fed tallow. Avocado. I thought you told me this was all nose to tail, you bastard. It's got plants in it.
I snuck some. Saldino would be.
Yeah, jojoba oil. It's going to kill me. Bergamot, frankincense. Oh, so it's psychedelic. Yes. Cedarwood. All right. Well, I'll smear this on my face. I actually, I used to use extra virgin olive oil. Do you do this podcast as a video also?
Yeah. This is,
so people are
we got it.
Getting a video. I used to do extra virgin olive oil on my face just because it was easy to walk into the pantry and do it. And I figured if I was buying olive oil anyway, it works really well. And then I realized, because I had some beef tallow. You can do beef tallow. I've experimented with ghee. Ghee doesn't work because it has that butyric acid smell. It's kind of farty smelling. Coconut oil isn't bad.
Coconut oil's good.
Beef tallow is
so this is good. So this is whipped too. It's like a whipped texture. And so it's just, and some essential oils. I
just put it on my skin, and the whole time I was putting it on my skin, I thought this was like a food product that you gave me. So now I don't feel quite as dumb.
No, it is. You're supposed to put it on your skin. It's food for your skin.
It's got grass-fed tallow. That's like the metric for a healthy beauty. What do you call it? A beauty-ceutical? Cosmeceutical?
If you can eat it.
I forget what you call it. If you can eat it.
Yeah. No, that's what we're doing. It's grass-fed, grass-finished suet. And yeah.
Probably still tastes like shit, but you could eat it.
Well, my dog might start licking you. But
and then what else? We've got this plant-based tonic. You haven't had this before, Brian, but Khalil, my friend at Sun Life Organic this morning. Well, no, last night I had a dinner and he gave me a shot of this stuff. It's called Feel Free. I'm not sponsored by them or anything. This isn't a ploy. It's called Feel Free. And it's basically kava, which is kind of the relaxing thing, which you know all about because you're from Hawaii. But then it's got kratom in it, which is kind of interesting. Kava and kratom, because kratom's like a non-opioid based painkiller. That's why most people use that, and sometimes for sleep or sometimes for energy, depending on the strain. And then kava is basically just it's muscle relaxant.
It's a relaxer.
It's like a euphoric muscle relaxant. So I asked Khalil, I'm like, how do you feel if you take this? And he said, you feel euphoric. And then I went to their website and it said, you feel euphoric. Maybe that's why they call it Feel Free. And so I had a shot last night before dinner. And I also had a cocktail, admittedly, but I felt like I'd had like 4 or 5 cocktails, but not like clumsy. I was lucid, but relaxed. And so you and I are drinking this right now on ice. I just did a shot yesterday, but it took like 20 or 30 minutes for me to kind of like feel it.
I'm already feeling it.
This whole shit might go south in like 20 minutes.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get
Are your
really
lips
mellow.
numb?
My tongue is numb.
Yeah.
No, I'm feeling good.
Mm.
Well, let's kick this off. You mentioned alcohol, so it may or may not have been my birthday last night, and I may or may not have drinking alcohol.
Really? It was your birthday last night?
Yeah.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thanks.
How old are you?
I'm 38.
Oh, I got you beat by a year.
Wow. So yeah, that's my goal is to look young. I feel like we're doing a good job of it.
Yeah.
Staying in shape.
Yeah, you look pretty well preserved.
I'm trying.
It always makes you sound like a mummy. Well preserved.
So yeah, I mean, okay. You're kind of like a biohacking guy. I'm trying to coin the phrase ancestral hacking. All right.
Ancestral hacking.
Instead of
That's
biohacking.
a lot more syllables than biohacking.
It is. It's not. It
It's
doesn't
like
roll
2
off your
more
tongue.
syllables. Yeah.
But it's like what biohacking does kind of mimics our ancestral environment, right? That's what I think it should do.
Some of it, yeah, like the red lights mimic infrared from the sun, or the grounding mats and the grounding shoes mimic earthing or grounding, or a cryotherapy chamber mimics cold water, or a sauna might mimic like a hot afternoon day. But then there's some things like a hyperbaric chamber.
You get it closer.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I've done this only a couple times
Keep pulling
before. Like a hyperbaric chamber, it's kind of like, well, what does that simulate? I don't know, like, how often was ancient man like 30 feet? No, like 30 feet under
below.
the water
Yeah,
at
yeah.
high oxygen, or yeah, same thing, like altitude training, like the hypoxic training devices, the Live O2, that would be an example of a biohack, or like a fitness biohack, like a Vasper, where you have your arms and legs occluded and you're exercising and you have cold. And so I think that there's a sector of biohacking that's mimicking natural living, or what our ancestors might have done, and allowing us to more efficiently do that, sometimes in a shorter period of time, in a post-industrial era in which we are kind of fighting an uphill battle where we might have to work indoors. So we need red light panels indoors, or we aren't sleeping in a cave, so we need like a grounding mat on our bed, or there's like glass and needles and syringes on the dirty Austin streets, so you need to wear like big built-up rubber-soled shoes, and so you put grounding straps on your shoes. And those would all, I think, fall under the category of mimicking, in a post-industrial era, using smart science, what our ancestors would have gotten through natural means, or what we can and should also get through natural means that we top off with those biohacks. But I do think there's like some other biohacks, like some of the stuff I mentioned, like, the hypoxic training devices, or the Vasper, or a hyperbaric chamber, or like stem cell injections, some of that stuff. Yeah. Like that's
the
full on
next
like
level.
modern science stuff that our ancestors would have done.
Well, I appreciate that stuff. So I'm just more into the ancestral hacks. I'm trying to do that. It's like a more natural version. Like instead of getting all these gadgets, like sleep rings and this and that, I'm trying to just do it more naturally. But yes, there is a next level that I appreciate. And that's what you are more of an expert in.
Well,
Right?
nature threw me a big fat clue that maybe I'm not supposed to be using a wearable yesterday, because I went swimming in Barton Springs. And when you swim, your appendages kind of shrink a little bit. There's shrinkage, not just crotchage shrinkage, but shrinkage of the digits and the toes. And I got like 20 minutes into my swim, and my Oura ring is now at the bottom of Barton Springs.
Well,
So it's a size 13, like $400 stealth black Oura ring for any of you Austinites who want to go underwater metal detecting, like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, and come up with my precious. So I lost my Oura ring yesterday, but I like the idea of unplugging to a certain extent, like you've just talked about. Brian McKenzie, and I think it was Kelly Starrett was his co-author. I think it was Kelly Starrett, and I think it was Brian McKenzie, and I could be wrong, but they wrote a book called Unplugged a few years ago about all the uses of heart rate variability monitors and power meters and stride rate metrics and muscle force meters used in fitness, and how sometimes we can lose touch with the signals that our own body is telling us in that type of scenario. Kind of like the classic, I woke up, I feel great, I had a wonderful night of sleep. I look at my wearable, it tells me my sleep was shitty and it was really 6 hours and I'm supposed to be tired today. And so suddenly I have a crappy workout because my ring or my watch told me I was supposed to have a crappy workout. And I certainly think that we risk that. When I was racing Ironman triathlon, I raced for Team Timex. And Timex, of course, hooked us up with like the $1,000 supercomputers the size of a pager that we'd wear on our wrists, and the electric bike meters for power, and the things we wore in our shoes for stride length, and even like pretty advanced stuff like stride rate, push off, power, everything for running, and metrics for swimming, even like the swim goggles that display your stroke rate and stuff to you, like on the back of the goggle screen as you're swimming. And I got like 2 years in the racing with them, and I just burnt out on all that stuff. I was like, I just want to go back to my cheap ass $15 Timex and just like kind of pay attention to how I feel when I'm running and pay attention to how I feel when I'm cycling. Not because I think those other training metrics and training technologies are bad or not useful, but I got to the point where I just kind of burnt out on all that stuff. And now I'm very selective about what I wear and what I track. And especially for me, like the biggest one is when I'm exercising. I just don't like to be wearing a lot when I'm exercising. Like I wear the ring, and I don't, I used to just like track HRV and recovery and every weight I'd lifted and all my sets and all my reps and, the Strava distance and all that stuff. I just like to move now and unplug, and it feels really refreshing. If I was a pro athlete, or if I was coaching a pro athlete, I'd have a different approach. But if you're just trying to live healthy and be natural, you don't need all that stuff really.
Well, you know what? I think it's good to start off with something like that. Like, like Levels gave me a CGM to try out for free, right? And it was great. So for 2 weeks, or actually I worked for a month.
Continuous glucose monitor.
Yeah. So for a month, I tried it, and I tried different foods, and I learned a lot, right? And I tried, like, if I ate sourdough bread, it was, slow fermented. It was the right kind of bread. It spiked way more than potatoes.
It spiked more the potatoes, although theoretically the sourdough bread should have a lower glycemic index, right?
So I don't know. Wow, this drink's hitting me actually.
Is it? Yeah.
I think
no. Move your lips.
But for me, I mean, I know it's variable per the person, but I just think, but it's like the bread is a more refined food, I think.
It can be, but a couple things to think about that, especially for like our listeners who are using a continuous glucose monitor, and this is really interesting, is let's say that on paper, slow fermented sourdough bread has a lower glycemic index than like Wonder Bread or regular bread, and a lower glycemic index on paper than a potato, assuming you're not talking about a potato that's been cooked and cooled and taken out to form resistant starch, which is a cool way to kind of like hack a potato or rice. But, and let's say that's the case on paper, but the interesting thing is, where's the wheat from? Like, is there glyphosate, herbicide, pesticide exposure that would be causing a sympathetic nervous system response that would actually cause your liver to start mobilizing blood glucose as a stress response? Do you have a food allergy or food intolerance to gluten or gliadin or other wheat proteins that you don't have to potatoes that would produce a similar effect? For example, like Tim Ferriss is super into the slow carb diet. And legumes would be considered a slow carb food, and green beans would be considered one of those legumes. And I was consuming green beans as not a staple in my diet, but I would probably have green beans like once or twice a week. And I got one of those continuous blood glucose monitors, and I started tracking, and my blood sugar would spike over and over again when I'd have these green beans, which are supposed to be a slow carb food that wouldn't spike your blood sugar. And then I did one of these food allergy tests called a Cyrex panel, which is a pretty good, like a gold standard food allergy test. Yeah, they test via the blood, the white blood cell reaction to both the raw and the cooked version of the protein. And then they have a special testing protocol where they'll do like back-to-back tests, and it's really gold standard. It doesn't result in like a laundry list of false positives for your food allergies. And the only thing, like I was pretty clean across the board, but the only thing that I flagged really high for was green beans. And so now I'm like, oh, well, it's not just the glycemic index of a food that dictates how it's going to affect your blood glucose. it's not just the bacterial profile in your stomach, which in your gut, which we also know will affect your blood glucose response to foods based on the day 2 studies in Israel, but it's also whatever your sympathetic nervous system is doing in response to that food, which gets super wild if it's like, well, maybe you're, I don't know, let's just say like you're divorced and you have you had a really unpleasant divorce, and your partner had like a certain food like chicken that they cooked for you, and now you're like your blood glucose spikes in response to chicken. So there could even be like a psychosomatic component. So that's why I think sometimes testing can tell you a lot of stuff that you really, really wouldn't realize just intuitively from books or whatever.
That's interesting. Or even like if people eat on the go and they're driving and they're like, that's like you're stressed out. Your body's like in a stressed state and you handle foods differently.
It is, I think it is so underemphasized, the importance of eating in a parasympathetic state. Now, of course, I'm very much a proponent of chewing your food, 25 to 40 times, saying grace or doing breath work or both prior to a meal, sitting down rather than standing when you eat. Not commuting when you eat, but I've become so cognizant of the change in my bowel function, the gas, the bloating, the undigested food particles I can see in my stool, and all the things that happen if I've consumed a meal when I'm on the go. When you combine that with the fact that I don't even really enjoy meals that I consume, like if I make myself an amazing smoothie and I drink it while I'm like headed to a doctor's appointment versus like drinking it while I'm sitting at home, like reading some cool news, which is like, because if I'm eating by myself, which I do sometimes at home and not with my family, I'll choose activities that are more passive while I'm eating, like reading the paper, thumbing through a magazine, reading a cool blog post, that type of thing. And I am highly cognizant now, and I think a lot of people really should be, about whether or not I'm in a sympathetic or a parasympathetic state when I'm consuming food. And of course, back to the metrics tracking, you could use something like a heart rate variability monitor, and just until you really, really know, only like don't eat until you figured out how to get your heart rate variability high before you eat. With, of course, the only exception being people who are like ultra endurance athletes who have to eat while they're exercising. The worst my gut's ever been in my life was when I was racing triathlon and had to eat while I was exercising. And not only that, but the increased gut permeability that occurs when you're exercising becomes even greater when you're exercising in the heat. And so I would be like mowing down power bars while riding my bike in 90 degrees. And yeah, I needed those calories theoretically. I mean, even if you're like ketogenic fat,
that's
burning,
what I was going to ask.
Whatever, you still need. I mean, like you're still burning appreciable amounts of glycogen. Like to the like a lot of people are like, oh, you're just riding your bike for endurance, bro. I'm like, no. Like if I got to tackle a hill and I'm pushing out 500 watts on a hill, or during a race, I've got 20 seconds to pass somebody, which is the allotted time to do so. Or at least it was when I was racing Ironman. I'm burning huge amounts of glucose. And therefore you need a throughput of glucose in addition to ketones and fatty acids. Now, when I was racing ketogenically, I still used about a quarter of the amount of carbohydrate that my competitors were using, because I used more ketones and amino acids, but you still need that glycogen throughput. And that amount of eating is just so hard on the gut because you're eating in that sympathetic state. So when someone's commuting in their car and eating, like picture that as the same state as a triathlete hammering a power bar while they're biking down the highway in 90 degrees. Like you're creating the same gut permeability scenario, or at least something that's somewhat synonymous.
How many years did you do each? Like, did you do like fat adapted training?
I did traditional, like Gatorade Sports Science Institute recommended 60% to 85% carbohydrates up to a 95% carbohydrate intake on race week to load, which I was accustomed to because prior to that I was a bodybuilder, and the best way to get super swole on stage is after you've done your morning weigh-ins, during which you're fully cramping because you're dehydrated and glycogen depleted. And I'd like weigh in at 180 pounds that morning and do my posing and stuff where all the judges are. But then typically with bodybuilding, it's in the evening when you do your full on like pose off with all the people in the audience cheering, and between like the 8 a.m. pose and the 6 p.m. show, I would go and punish like waffles, potatoes, ice cream, all the carbohydrates I hadn't been eating for weeks on end. I would gain easily in a day like 10 to 15 pounds of water and glycogen weight. My muscles would just be popping through my skin. I'd look super swole on stage. So I was accustomed when I got to Ironman of this concept of deplete carbs somewhat. And by deplete carbs, what I mean is when I was following the standard recommendations, like eat 60% carbohydrate intake, but then get up to like 85, 90% carbohydrate intake by the time that the day of the race was. And so I did that for like 6 or 7 years and had really bad gas and really bad bloating. And even though I didn't test for it at the time, probably had SIBO, which a ton of endurance athletes especially have who are following those basic carbohydrate recommendations, fluctuating blood glucose levels, fluctuating it. Like all of this led to me writing my first book, Beyond Training, because I was trying to like hack these issues and figure out what was going on. So I got into the world of self-quantification and testing, and I performed really well on carbs because there's a saying like sugar is a sometimes drug. And it can be a super, super effective performance enhancing aid, especially if you've been low carb and then you introduce carbs into the equation. Like you feel like you're on steroids. But the problem, of course, was all the metabolic and longevity side effects of that amount of carbohydrate throughput. So then I started to experiment with low carbohydrate intake, with ketosis. I kind of had an extrinsic motivator because Dr. Jeff Volk asked me to be part of the FASTER study at University of Connecticut.
Zach Bitter was part of it too, right?
Yes, Zach was a part of it. And I was one of the selected ketogenic athletes. So for 12 months, I followed a strict ketogenic diet, 90%. Fat, like
a
full
traditional
on ketogenic,
keto,
like a traditional, which I think for athletes, a lot of times there's a mistake made because we're told ketogenic diet is 30 to 40 grams, when in fact, the research to date shows that endurance athletes stay in ketosis, a carbohydrate intake of up to 300 grams per day. But for this particular study, I was closer to like probably about 50, maybe 60 grams. I remember that when I went in for that study, the pre-3-hour treadmill run meal that they gave me was like 2 strawberries in like 6 ounces of heavy cream.
Wow.
Right. And which for me, like the fat profile was accurate, but that was like not enough calories. It was just nothing. So anyways, I did that study. And of course, during that study, I was still racing and everything and applying a lot of what I was learning in my training, using everything from exogenous ketones to amino acids to higher intake of electrolytes, just because your electrolytes get more stripped when you're stripping glycogen from your body. And it kind of got to the point where I figured out how to feel really good on that fueling approach. Although after the study, I shifted into more of a cyclic ketotic approach with evening carbohydrate refeeds. The reason being that my performance was better. Although with the evening carbohydrate refeeds, I was able to be in ketosis and be burning fatty acids for most of the day, briefly foray out of it. And by the next morning, I was at like 3 millimolar ketones because I was so fat adapted. And the other reason that I made that modification was because during those 12 months of preparing for Jeff Volk's study, my TSH went through the roof. My free T3 and T4 and total both plummeted. My testosterone went to a state of hypogonadism. And a lot of that was because I had enough calories. I wasn't energy restricted, but I did not have enough glucose to go around at all.
Did you have enough protein?
Yeah, I think I did.
Some of those ketos
not
are
only
too low.
did I have a decent amount of protein, I was probably at about 0.6 to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, which I think was enough protein. And I was supplementing pretty heavily with amino acids at the time due to advice that Peter Attia gave me when I bonked during one of my races. I called him up on the phone and we had a chat because he was kind of experimenting with a lot of this stuff at the same time that I was. And he had been kind of using branched chain amino acids. So I started to use the BioSteel branched chain amino acids that he recommended during a lot of my training sessions. And because I was training so much, that's a lot of amino acids that you're taking in if you're training like 2 hours a day. And then I also met another guy named Dr. David Minkoff, who was more of a proponent of, instead of using the branched chain amino acids, leucine and isoleucine and valine, he instead was getting better results for both health and performance with his clients and his athletes doing all 9 amino acids, like the 9 essential amino acids. So I started doing that instead. And I got so into the effects, like the multitude of effects that the essential amino acids had, that wound up being one of my flagship products at Keon. Was, I was just using them so much. That's the way I formulate a lot of my supplements. I'll like scratch my own itch and then figure out how to like tweak it and refine it and turn it into a product. And so, yeah, from a protein standpoint, I think I was getting enough, and I was using a hefty amount of essential amino acids too.
Interesting. What was the results of the study? Like, what did the faster study show? I don't really remember do you remember the big takeaways?
The big takeaways were, it was such an interesting study because I showed up to the Yukon lab the day prior to the 3-hour treadmill run, which was kind of like the big part of the test, obviously, for endurance, because this was a study specifically on the effects of a ketogenic diet on endurance performance in ultra endurance athletes, primarily ultra marathoners and Ironman athletes. And the day before were muscle biopsies. And so they were looking at the composition of the muscle itself, which involves a guillotine-like needle plunged into the quadriceps and the hamstrings to extract muscle. So you're very bruised the next day while you're doing that 3-hour every time my foot would strike the treadmill, there'd be a little grimace. And then they did basically every 15 minutes during the treadmill run blood draws to analyze what the blood metrics were doing. And that would include blood glucose, fatty acids, etc. They did a VO2 max test, maximum oxygen utilization to exhaustion test, the evening prior. And then they did a stool, like a microbiome test. There was nothing that earth-shattering about most of the results from like a microbiome standpoint or many of the blood standpoint, aside from the fact that both groups were pretty equivalent as far as the VO2 max was concerned.
Was the other group a traditional high carb?
Well, they would just say a traditional, not a traditional high carb, but yeah, traditional by the way that you and I would judge things would certainly be high carb. But what they found was that the ketogenic diet did not offer any substantial improvements in performance versus the traditional diet, but there was also no average decrement in performance either. So it was a wash, but that's from a performance standpoint. And I would argue that it's not a wash from a metabolic health standpoint, provided that you maybe modify that ketogenic diet in the way that I did after the test, which would be to not restrict carbohydrates to the extent to where you're getting some physiological blowback. They also found, and I think this would be advantageous also for the ketogenic diet, that the endurance athletes who were following the ketogenic diet had, and this was based on the muscle biopsy, better glycogen conservation mechanisms. We actually developed the ability to be able to hold on to carbohydrates better in muscle. They didn't analyze liver because a liver biopsy would have been super painful, but they analyzed the muscle, and we were storing our carbohydrates more efficiently, or at least not burning through our carbohydrate stores quite as much, which makes intuitive sense because we were burning fatty acids and ketones more readily. I don't recall what the microbiome effects were. I mean, I would imagine to be a shift just because there always is when you're consuming carbs versus fat in the microbiome profile. But the main thing was, it doesn't help you performance-wise, but also doesn't hurt you.
I mean, that's big because people just think, they assume you have to have carbs to do these type of events. Right.
And if they would have repeated that test on a highly glycolytic audience, let's say, and by highly glycolytic, I don't mean like a power lifter or a volleyball player or a tennis player, but more like a CrossFitter or someone who is engaged in efforts that are repeated and that are longer than about 30 seconds in duration, which is the point at which you begin to burn an appreciable amount of carbs. So let's say like people who are doing like 30-second to 2-minute hard efforts as part of their sport, they probably would have seen, because studies since then have shown this to be the case, that a ketogenic diet does not allow for as good of a performance if you're engaged in a highly glycolytic sport like that, simply because you're burning a lot of carbohydrates. But what I would like to see, and I don't know if this has been done, would be, okay, well, what if you go maybe not full on traditional ketogenic, but like low carb versus traditional. So maybe you're having like 200 grams or even 300, which this would shock a lot of ketogenic, but 300 is still considered low carb. And I would imagine that if you just kind of shift ketogenic to be slightly higher carb, you wouldn't see any performance decrements in CrossFitters and stuff either. You know, when I've done like Spartan racing, which is kind of like CrossFit, I've certainly found that to be the case. Like, because when I did 4 years of Spartan racing, I was low carb the whole time, just doing like evening carbohydrate refeeds, and I was fine from a glycolytic standpoint.
And then on race day, would you use carbs?
for the Spartan race days.
Yeah.
Yes, but similar to my Ironman approach,
Just less.
like way less
Yeah.
of what would normally be recommended with a super easily digested carbohydrate. And for me, rather than the traditional approach of using like a gel that's typically fructose and maltodextrin, two highly fermentable carbohydrates, which aren't good for people who have gut issues, or using like glucose based blends, or even something like the UCAN super starch, which a lot of ketogenic athletes use, but which is also highly fermentable. And so you get a lot of gas and bloating after your event that I just couldn't handle. What I found worked best was a potato based starch. So I would use brands, for example, like Vitargo or Glycofuse, which allows for like a high glycemic index, but easily digestible carbohydrate to be consumed during exercise. But I would use like a quarter of what they recommended per hour, which I think came out to like around 100 calories or so of carbohydrates per hour. And then I would have like a shot of ketone esters or ketone salts and about 5 to 10 grams of amino acids and electrolytes. So I was essentially filling in the carbohydrate gap with ketones, amino acids, and electrolytes instead of carbohydrates, with a trace amount of carbohydrates. And that worked really well. And the only modification to that was that for something like an Ironman triathlon, using that fueling approach, I still found that towards the very end of the race, when you're about to go, like at about the 13-mile mark of an Ironman, like you really put your foot to the pedal, like pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
And just like everything you have left for the next anywhere from 70 to 90 minutes, depending on how fast you're running that last 13.2 miles, I would be going very fast and going to the brink of exhaustion at that point. And all I did at that point was, quit drinking the ketones and the amino acids and everything. And I would just drink Coca-Cola. All the aid stations had Coke. It was the perfect thing. It was like caffeine, sugar, cold. And so for like the last slightly more than an hour of the race, it would just be like pure sugar. But at that point, it just hits you really, really well because you've not been using that up until that point. And so for Ironman, like there was a certain point where I'd switch to just like full on sugar at the very, very end.
That's interesting. I did a pentathlon in the Masters Championships without even eating. I did fasted. I don't even know why I did it. I just did it as a goof, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm going to train for another one, the decathlon, do all 10 events in 2 days.
Oh, wow.
So I used to be a pole vaulter. So I was like,
wow,
if I can pole vault, that's the hardest event. So I just did it fasted. But I think I'll kind of do that approach, like using carbs next time on the day, but train pretty fat adapted.
But isn't the decathlon pretty, I guess what you would call phosphogenic, meaning most of the efforts are like 10 to 30 seconds.
They are. They're very short. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they do have a 1500. So it's basically a mile.
Oh, there's a 1500. Okay.
Yeah, but there's 100, 1500. There's hurdles. There's javelin, shot put, discus, long jump. They have all kinds of stuff. I don't think it was optimum the way I did it. I don't know. I just kind of was messing around.
Well, for something like that, I would certainly supplement with creatine for sure. And you get creatine from muscle meat, but like just using a good like 5 to even 10 grams. If you haven't been using it at this point, I wouldn't use it now, but in future events, loading with creatine, not loading with it, but using it consistently, like every morning, 5 grams. And then you could use some like your race or your event morning fuel could be something like some sweet potato or something like that to top off the energy stores just a little bit. But a couple of ideas. I picked this up from a guy named Steve. I forget his last name. He worked for Hammer Nutrition. Basically, his argument was that prior to an event, if you eat a meal that's higher in carbohydrates, based on the equation, I forget, you might know this. What's the metabolic theory that the body will shift into substrate utilization based on the predominant substrate you are consuming? Like if you consume carbohydrates, you're going to burn more carbs in the acute phase afterwards. If you eat more fats, you'll burn more fats in the acute phase afterwards. I did a whole podcast way back when with a gal about this, and she had a whole article about it. Now I'm forgetting the name of the equation. Anyways, it's not even that important. But aside from the fact that I'd sound really smart if I could remember what it was, but it's that damn kava or kratom.
Oh,
maybe
I know.
it's slowing
My
down.
head's like a little floating.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like I've had maybe like 3 cocktails right now. So hopefully this isn't too shitty of a podcast for people. But anyways, what his theory was that if you eat a high carbohydrate meal prior to an event, then you risk shifting yourself towards a state of carbohydrate utilization so effectively that you almost get like a post-meal hypoglycemic drop due to the insulinogenic response to the carbohydrates. And that therefore what you should do if you are going to consume carbohydrates during is for your pre-event meal, have something that's higher in fat. And this is actually what I started doing for Ironman. For me, it was just like a fatty coffee, right? With, a butter or coconut oil and, and some cinnamon and salt. It's like a traditional fatty coffee type of approach. I'd say the actual B word for the actual coffee, but I don't want to cease and desist order for us using that without the trademark. So we'll just go with B, with B coffee.
Fatty coffee. Yeah.
Actually, I think I can go with this because it's not trademark. Dave Asprey's wonderful, remarkable recipe for coffee. So when I would use that, basically, I would be able to keep myself in fat burning mode. And then once the event began, and the hypoglycemic issue was not as much of an issue because you become a lot more like insulin sensitive and don't need as much insulin released once you're actually exercising. That's the approach that worked really well for me. So it was like, don't have any carbohydrates until the event actually begins and then start having your carbohydrates. And that worked pretty well. So yeah, that'd be something to think about too.
Yeah. I'm interested in just longevity, I guess. I think everyone's kind of interested in that. And so you're talking about the carb refeed at night. This is kind of what I landed on as the best way to do a diet, I think. And I want to get your take.
Okay.
So it's like you're fat adapted. You may maybe get fat adapted for a period of time, but then add in the carbs back in at night. And I just think you kind of get the best of both worlds. What do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, not only do you get the best of both worlds for the reasons that I dictated earlier, meaning that you top off your carbohydrate levels, yet still are in a relative state of fatty acid utilization the majority of the 24-hour cycle, with a brief foray out of ketosis and fat burning due to that evening carbohydrate refeed, right? You can ensure that you more rapidly return to a state of fatty acid utilization by engaging in or consuming something that would be a glucose disposal agent or that would cause you to be more insulin sensitive prior to that evening carbohydrate refeed. And for that, the best thing is prior to your dinner that's going to include carbohydrates, you would do either a weight training session or a high intensity interval training session, or cold thermogenesis, or you would consume a glucose disposal agent like berberine or bitter melon, or even like if you were out at a restaurant, you go up to the bar and you just order a bunch of bitters on ice. That's also a good hack if you don't have anything on you. Ceylon cinnamon, apple cider vinegar, any of these traditional GDAs. Probably the best one right now being dihydroberberine, which is a form of berberine that seems to work very well. Or, tooting my own horn, the product I developed is a glucose, the Keon Lean, that's what I use is Keon Lean, which is bitter melon extract, chromium, and vanadium. And anything like that prior to that evening carbohydrate refeed is going to make you able to return to your state of fatty acid utilization much better. Plus, the carbohydrates that you consume with dinner allow for a greater serotonin response to the carbohydrates, thus resulting in better sleep due to the melatonin upregulation that occurs from the carbohydrate feed. And then, as if that weren't enough advantages of this, the other cool thing is when you have carbohydrates for your evening meal, you tend to allow yourself to be more social, right? Because what's the most social meal of the day typically? The one where you might be going out to dinner or having a meal with the family where there's 4 different food groups on the table, some of which contain carbohydrates. What's the meal that might be the least, I guess, in your control if you are going out to a restaurant or over to someone's house for dinner? Well, it's dinner. So why not hack your day or engineer your day such that dinner would be the most macronutrient flexible meal for you? Because if you're one of those people, like a lot of people are, who has total control of and less like social effects on your breakfast and your lunch, and for me, my breakfast and my lunch every day is like the same thing. Breakfast is like a kind of like a ketogenic superfood smoothie, and lunch is like a salad with some fish or nuts or whatever. Then by saving all your carbohydrates for dinner, you're making yourself just a funner person to be around socially and not feeling like you got to go to a steakhouse and just order like a stick of butter and some steak.
This is great because this is like the best of all worlds. Yeah, this is what I've been trying to think about forever. And it's like you have a longevity mode for, say, 21 hours a day. I call it longevity mode, and then growth mode for say 3 hours a day. So I do my workout. So I'm in growth mode. I'm doing my workout. I'm doing brief, intense exercise. I sprint. I do weights. I do weighted body weight, like dips and pull-ups with like 40 pounds. And then I eat, a steak with some carbs. And I feel like that's just the best of all worlds.
Perfect example. Last night, I went to Arlo Gray at my hotel. Paul Saladino and Luke Story and Stefano Sifandos and I had dinner. I love to have dinner with people. All three of those guys have been on my podcast.
Yeah.
And it's fun because what winds up happening, opening the kimono for our listeners is like when people who have podcasts together get together, it's almost like the podcast just keeps going and we keep talking about all this crazy shit at dinner. And I was working during the afternoon. I know I had dinner. I took a peek at the menu, as I'm prone to do, just to see what is going to be available to order. And I saw some things that, like sweet corn and carrot, Texas tomato salad with sourdough bread, like a watermelon gazpacho, like some elements of the menu that dictated that. I was like, oh, okay. So there's some decent carbohydrate option, and it's not all Twinkies and donuts. So I'll have carbs tonight for sure. And prior to that dinner, I dropped into the gym. I did a 5x10 deadlift. I took a cold shower. I grabbed my lean and I went to dinner and I ordered a bitters forward cocktail with dinner. And so all of those things just shifted me into a state where, I could punish a bunch of sourdough bread and stuff. And I'm not wearing my continuous glucose monitor on this trip. I wear it for about a week out of every month or so. But I guarantee that by doing all that stuff before dinner, like I'm super carb sensitive. And it's not as though like people are probably thinking, oh my gosh, you just turned dinner into like an hour and a half long preparatory affair by the time I exercise and do my cold shower. But what I'll do is I'll just say, okay, well, part of my workout today, if I'll just like shorten the morning workout and make the evening workout, a little bit longer or something like that. So, as long as you think ahead and you like plan ahead, I think the carbohydrate refeed strategy works really well. I
think it's the best way to live. I did 2 meals a day. I just like to eat a lot in 2 meals instead of 3. But man, okay. So I was going to bring up alcohol. So if people do, we got
a long time ago. I don't even know what time it is. Okay.
So for alcohol, if you're gonna drink, I like to drink socially, right? It's like I know some people in the health community, they're just like, I don't drink at all. I'm so healthy. I'm like, I appreciate that, but I do like to be social and have a drink on the weekends, and I'll do tequila and soda water is my go-to. But so do you have any other like tips for people who, if they do drink, what to do before or after?
Yeah, for sure. Hide your car keys. No, well, when you say drink, because let me say this, what I don't want to do, and I sometimes question if I should have done this in my book, Boundless. I have like 2 pages that's like the party protocol, or the Vegas protocol, whatever you want to call it, where it's basically like, okay, so you're going to go tie one on and you're going to like have a lot to drink. Here's what to do. And it's everything from like the charcoal tortillas in the morning to the glycine and the activated charcoal and everything by the bedside and the electrolytes and a glass of water for every glass of alcohol that you consume, and ideas for the cleanest burning stuff like tequila or vodka or gin or organic wine versus like a margarita mix or a super sugary protocol. Like it's all in there, right? We can fill up like an hour with those couple of pages in the book. But the reason that I sometimes question that is I just don't endorse drunkenness. I value sobriety. And part of that is because it's multifold. I'm a Christian, and the Bible has told me to be sober and to not be in a state of drunkenness. And I think that's wise, just because we don't want a bunch of people out like beating their spouses and poisoning their livers. And
we don't want drunkenness, but like crazy. Have a couple drinks.
But like having a couple drinks. And by the way, I should note that because I have a big article coming out about this on my website tomorrow, actually. When I say that I value sobriety, some people like, okay, but you've done ayahuasca and you've journeyed with psilocybin and you've used plant medicines, and that's being drunk. I think if you take a ceremonial plant medicine in the proper set and setting, and it's highly controlled and for a specific intention, and it's not, some crazy party where you're going into the K-hole or something like that, I don't equate that to drunkenness. And I think that the spirit of any wisdom given in the Bible or elsewhere about valuing sobriety is dictating that because you don't want a bunch of drunk, irresponsible people wandering the streets. I think like doing ketamine in a doctor's office under close supervision, or like doing a psilocybin, facilitated psilocybin journey in a highly controlled setting. I don't think that's drunkenness. But anyways, rabbit hole. But back to you having a couple drinks. So first of all, I think that, of course, the clean burning alcohols are super, super important. So that means if you're a beer person, you make sure you're drinking, organic, non-GMO based grains. There are even some wheat-free versions of beer that you can have. Some of the gluten-free stuff tastes kind of crappy, but go as organic as you can with selected ingredients on beer. For wine, go with something very similar to like the dry farm wines approach, where it is low irrigated crops that have not been subjected to as much water and grown in a traditional European biodynamic type of style, old world wines because they don't get as much water. They have lower amounts of sugar, slightly lower amounts of alcohol. The grape is more concentrated in antioxidants. So like an organic biodynamic wine. And if you're out drinking and you don't know, and organic and biodynamic isn't on the menu, then Italy, France, and New Zealand are the three countries that tend to still use primarily organic and biodynamic methods. And, shout out to dry farm wines, because that's the majority of the wine that we drink at our house. And I just get a case of that sent to my house.
I had some of it last night. Yeah.
Yeah. And then aside from that, tequila, vodka, and gin are all pretty clean. They burn pretty clean. They're not stay far away from mixes like margarita or seltzers or any of these pre-made cheerleader drinks, as my wife calls them, that are just super duper sugary.
Oh yeah.
You just lost all your cheerleader listeners, by the way.
Yeah.
And then if I'm having more than a couple of drinks, then something that will mop up some of the acetaldehyde and ethanol, and that would be activated charcoal or chlorella. Glycine can also work pretty well for both vegetable oils and for alcohol as like a hack, like 2 to 4 grams of glycine, which is nice also because glycine will lower your body's core temperature prior to sleep. And so that can also help with sleep. And then there is an extract that is remarkable at that post-drinking morning haze that just like cleans out your system. And it acts very similar to what I would have recommended in the past, which would be like N-acetylcysteine or glutathione for helping your liver to detox the alcohol. You can take that the night of or the morning after or both. But there is another supplement that Sean Wells turned me on to, and I'll find it because I just started using it this past month. Okay, let me look up the name of this. It's like a raisin extract. Dr. William Seeds, who I interviewed on my podcast about peptides, he had developed something called a chill pill, which was kind of similar to the ingredients in this one, but it's called dihydromyricetin. Dihydromyricetin. I could only find one company that makes it called Super Smart, but about 3 capsules of that in the morning, like just beats the pants off glutathione, N-acetylcysteine, anything else I've tried in that respect. So, that and just hydration. The other thing that I always travel to bars with in my fanny pack, actually, unless your dog just ate them, in which case I don't have them any longer, is some type of really good, like tasty electrolyte blend. Like Rob Wolf has his company, Element. I've been using this one made by a guy interviewed on my podcast a couple of months ago, a Navy SEAL named Nick Norris. He developed this really tasty electrolyte blend that has lemon and raspberry called Protect. And then in a pinch, I guess pun intended, I'll also just sometimes have a little Ziploc bag with a really good salt. And so I'll typically order in between my drinks sparkling water on ice, and I'll add electrolytes to it and or salt. And then the other thing that I add to it is hydrogen tablets, which are a really good anti-inflammatory and antioxidant. So typically I'll have let's say I'm going to have 3 cocktails and for me, that's a party, baby. Like I'm going off the rails if I'm having 3 cocktails. And so I'll have a cocktail, like a really good bitters forward, vodka, gin, tequila, whatever. And then have electrolytes with a hydrogen tablet, then have a cocktail, then have electrolytes with a hydrogen tablet, then a cocktail, then electrolytes with a hydrogen tablet, get back to the hotel or the room or wherever, pop some charcoal or some chlorella and some glutathione or that dihydromyricetin I just talked about. The next morning, same thing, glutathione, dihydromyricetin, and that's a basic protocol.
That's good. Helpful. And I heard vitamin E is a good hack. If you're going to eat at a restaurant, there might be seed oils and that type of thing, that if you have a vitamin E in your pocket, it'll help kind of protect.
Yeah. Vitamin E is a pretty good solution for everything from controlling the formation of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in response to high fructose or high alcohol consumption to what was the compound we were just talking about? It was
Vitamin E.
Vitamin E. Okay.
Yeah.
We should
We're
leave,
back.
we should leave this in there just so the listeners can chuckle. This isn't quite to the level of like Tim Ferriss when he drunk dials his listeners. I'm hoping
I heard about that.
I'm hoping we're still giving lucid advice here. So anyways, vitamin E can help with that. It's a pretty good antioxidant too. High doses post-exercise you want to avoid because they can blunt some of the mitochondrial and hormetic response to exercise. But in the scenario of a toxin like alcohol or high intake of fructose,
Specifically seed oils too.
or seed oils, it could be helpful. Probably, I would say if you're going to take vitamin E, get a good blend of both the tocopherols and the tocotrienols. Like a lot of vitamin E, it's just like one or two of the tocopherols. One plant-based compound called annatto. And the company Designs for Health has a pretty good version of this. Their annatto is like all 4 tocopherols and all 4 tocotrienols. I think that Thorne's vitamin E product is similar in that respect. So basically what I'm saying is not all vitamin E is created equal. Make sure you get a good one. So yeah, vitamin E for that or for vegetable oil exposure. And then Dr. James Nicolantonio had a research paper that came out a couple of years ago in which he showed that spirulina and also glycine, which I mentioned earlier, are both very effective at controlling some of the oxidative and cell membrane damage that occurs in response to vegetable oil consumption. So let's say you're eating that. Granted, it's cold expeller pressed canola oil, non-GMO, a little bit better than your average canola oil at Whole Foods, right? And you're at the Whole Foods salad bar and you're dishing up your plate and everything, then just like swing through the supplement section and grab some glycine and or some spirulina. And you can have that after you've had the canola oil, and it's going to control and kind of like mop up some of the damage.
Okay. I like this. So I'm making the film. We were talking about food lies. I'm trying to, like put everything you've ever learned, I've ever learned, we've all ever learned into one film. What do you think are the biggest problems? Like, I'm always interested in like, how did we get in this mess? Why is 88% of Americans metabolically unwell? So what message would you put in a film? I was telling you what I was going to do. What we're saying, meat is a health food, and we're saying avoid the processed refined grains, sugars, and seed oils. Like, do you think that that's, how do you boil it down? You know, there's so much going on. There's so many theories. Like, what do you think it is?
We could dish out theories till the cows come home, even though I don't know what that means because I'm not a farmer or a rancher, and I've never quite understood that analogy or metaphor or saying. And we could kind of like do the whole echo chamber thing that every other podcast on the face of the planet is doing, like eat real food, don't have vegetable oils, be careful with excess sugar, yada, yada, yada. Like, we know, thank you. But here's where I feel that the disconnect lies, because I have children. There's still a prevailing, almost like this prevailing fault or philosophy, especially in parenting, where you don't want your kid to be weird, and you want your kid to grow up like having the life that a lot of other kids have. Like, you grew up in America, you got to have had a Big Mac, and you got to have gone to In-N-Out Burger, and you never had a Twinkie. That's like a classic American food. And oh my gosh, there'd be nothing better than after this 4th of July party than to do our traditional greasy pizza, because that's what our dad did, and that's what our grandpa did, and that's just like our tradition. And I feel like there's almost like this approach, especially amongst parents, because I see this a lot, is all the other kids are having cake, so it's okay to have cake too. Even though all the parents, when you talk to them, like at the party, they're like, yeah, I'm gluten-free and I'm super healthy, but you know, let the kids be kids. Like, let them grow up, like, you know, enjoying all of our American comfort foods, or enjoying whatever. If you're up here in Canada, like, you got to have poutine. And so the problem is that I think we still have a lot of societal pressure to not be weird, to not deprive our children of having a normal upbringing. And so they should be able to have these foods. It's going to be hard for us to say, okay, you're going to throw a birthday party, but at the birthday party, we're going to have like coconut ice cream and, root beer floats made with like real sarsaparilla and wonderful, like more of the good stuff versus the junk food, because junk food is woven into culture as such a tradition and a go-to that it's uncomfortable in many social scenarios to extricate that. And so I think really where it starts is parents educating their children to be themselves and do what they know is right and be educated about the consequences, including the metabolic food consequences of the decisions that they make, and to not be who the world expects them to be, and to be okay with being weird and defying social norms, and when all like being actually like dad. And when you go to a birthday party where there's going to be cupcakes and stuff, you've got like a really good like raw cacao dark chocolate bar slipped into your backpack, and you're going to have that while everybody else is having cupcakes. And this sounds trite, but in many cases, shifting a habit that's deleterious to a culture starts with parenting. It starts with the kids. And so, if every parent were to just start to educate their children better, and also tell their kids, look, it's okay if you don't have cake. Like some of the other kids might think that's weird, but dad's going to take you out to ice cream tomorrow night, and here's a dark chocolate bar you can take to the party. And I think that would make a bigger dent than a lot of people realize if we were to just get a lot of this junk food out of tradition, out of vernacular, out of expectations of what a child should be able to have the joy of experiencing through childhood. Because what happens is they finally turn like 25 and start to have some metabolic issues and start to look into healthy eating and healthy food, and realize that what they've been doing for the past couple of decades was just swallowing hook, line, and sinker what everybody else in society was doing because they needed to be cool or not be a social outcast from a food and drink standpoint. And if we can get kids to the point where rather than making a bunch of crappy mistakes and like fixing them later in life when it's finally time to lose weight because or you fix yourself because you're suffering metabolically, if you just never went through that phase, right? If you just grew up eating healthy food because that's what people do, then I think that would make a huge dent. Like it should be weird to have a Big Mac. Like if you're having a Big Mac, people should be like,
why would you do that?
Like that's weird. Like that's like you're eating dog shit. And we have to get to that point in society.
That's the goal. Yeah. But it's like, how do we get there? You got to teach people. Also, so I just came from beach volleyball. I'm getting sand all over my couch.
That's okay. I got to wrap pretty soon.
Yeah.
I have to check out of my hotel soon.
That's true. So I was going to say, so I talk to these people. They're like the normal people, right? So I'm hanging out with these beach volleyball people. I'm trying to tell them all the stuff, the health, I'm sure you get into all these conversations and you're trying to download people on all this information. And they're just like, my thing is you can give them all the information, but actually doing it is another thing. So this is what you're talking about. It's like how to actually live the lifestyle. If you can know everything, but actually doing it is the hard part. And also, I think changing your community. You're talking about like changing parenting, but if your community, if people around you do it, then you're not weird. So that's what I was trying to say. So now I'm in Austin, I'm hanging with people that are like-minded, and now I am not the weird person because we have a barbecue and everyone just shows up with healthy food, right? And yeah, I don't know how to get there.
Healthy food, that is tasty and that's really good. And I think that when we hear this idea, and this has been shown in research, that I don't want to fat shame, but like fat people a lot of times are fat because a lot of their friends are fat, or unhealthy people are unhealthy because the people they hang out with are also unhealthy. And then the healthy people hang out with the healthy people. So we have this rift in society, right? We have the healthy people hanging out with healthy people and the unhealthy or fat people hanging out with fat people. And what then needs to occur is you have to start inviting your unhealthy friends or your overweight friends to the same type of events, but just make sure they're always outnumbered, right? And that's what I love about the dinner parties that I throw at my house is I'll have somebody at the party who is not accustomed to eating healthy food that's actually tasty. They think they're accustomed to like, what's the bodybuilding meal? Broccoli and chicken, what they call brickin', right? They're accustomed to brickin' being health food, like giving my lean chicken breast with no oil and no salt on it and some unflavored broccoli that's steamed and maybe a little bit of white rice on the side. And they'll show up to my house and it's like a coffee and cacao rubbed fatty ribeye steak and a glass of organic wine and like some type of like amazing natural gluten-free carrot cake and some like baked sweet potato fries along with the meat. and people eat that and they're like, how do you not gain weight on this food? Like, how is this healthy? And I'm like, because this is God actually made some really great ingredients, and when prepared properly, like, you can eat really, really well. And yeah, you still need a certain amount of self-control. Let's face it. At the end of the day, like, calories in, calories out, like, there's a lot to be said for that equation. And you can get fat on ribeye steak, just the same.
If you eat like 10 pieces of that carrot cake.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But that's kind of the idea too, is you want to do what you're doing, Brian, but then bring people who are unhealthy or who aren't accustomed to that into the crowd, into the circle. And then, then they go out to their friends and, and we just start to spread the word.
Well, that's how to make it sustainable. I always try to spread this message of I'm so lucky that I found this and get to eat this food, right? It's like every meal to me is amazing treats. And if people knew that they could have an amazing treat as a healthy meal, then maybe they'd actually do it.
That's why I just wrote a cookbook.
Did you? I'm writing a cookbook too.
I promise that's my last shameless plug. Yeah. So yeah, I think that education is a big part of it, but education with love.
Enacting
with love,
not
with shaming. Yeah, and acting on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I have another plug. I gave you this biltong. You can take it on the plane.
Thank you.
So my Nose to Tail company makes this biltong.
I'll hold it up for your camera.
Yeah.
Grass-fed beef and then biltong. It's kind of like jerky, but it's more like dense and moist, right?
Well, yeah, it's slow air dried instead of like baked at a high temperature to dehydrate like jerky. So it's softer.
Wow.
So,
this looks really good. And I'm going to totally punish this on the plane.
Go for
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, I know you got to go, but next time we could play some volleyball. I didn't know you played volleyball back in the day.
I did. I played middle for University of Idaho. So I was a short middle at 6'2", but back then I had hops until I got into endurance sports and converted a lot of my fast twitch into slow twitch. But I like me some 2s or 3s on the beach for sure. So I'm in next time. I'm going to be back in Austin in October for my friend Joe DiStefano's Runga event. And I'll hang out for a few days and we'll definitely get some beach volleyball in as long as you promise to go to a little cold swim at Barton Springs with me.
Oh, I'll do that. It's great to jump in after. Good stuff, man.
Game on.
Good meeting you at Paul's. We crushed some cornhole. I think we won 15-0.
We beat Paul Saladino and his girlfriend 15-0. So they probably should have had more plants prior to that game. And yeah, I guess the last thing is we should title this podcast like Drunken Banter or something like that. So again, my apologies to folks if I lost track there a few times during the show. I'm going to blame it on this feel-free plant-based tonic. But honestly, it's not
good. Bad. I mean, if you don't want to drink, we talked about alcohol. This is a pretty good alternative to alcohol. I feel like I'm buzzed.
Yeah, like I feel like I'm buzzed too. I think Khalil told me he was going to ship me a box of this stuff. So what I like to do is sometimes find out what my ceiling dose is. So I may try 2 or 3 of these. But I tell you what, it's a little bit different taking it and having a microphone in front of your face because you get kind of self-conscious and you're like, do I sound drunk right now? Versus if you just drinking it at a dinner party and just chatting with a bunch of people. But yeah, shout out to these folks. Botanic Tonics, feel free. Maybe I'll see if I can hunt down a deal or something from them. I'll send it over to you if I do. So thanks for having me on, man.
All right, man. I guess let's just wrap it up.
All right. That's a wrap.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing with a friend. Please give this podcast a review on iTunes or the podcast app. Go to nosetotale.org. Top quality products that sell themselves. I'm not going to try to sell them. Just go there and check them out. We got sapien.org for the program and the Sapien Tribe. Get the show notes, bonus features, private access, all the things. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We'll see you next week.